Cartoons have always had a special place in my heart. If you watched one of my last videos, you'd know this. I talked about SpongeBob SquarePants and how it's one of my favorite cartoons of all time. Well, today I'm here to talk about one of my favorite cartoon providers, cartoon channels, cartoon collections of all time. And that would be Cartoon Network. Over the years, Cartoon Network has done primarily two things for me. Been a fantastic source of entertainment, as well as feed my imagination. Now, what do you mean by feed my imagination? Well, the shows on Cartoon Network were quite literally so creative that it gave me almost a new way of thinking about things. It gave me a new, I wouldn't say third eye, but I would say something along the lines of just a perspective change. Shows like Regular Show and Scooby-Doo, Gumball, Adventure Time, all of these amazing shows, banger after banger. Don't let me forget about Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. All of these shows kind of ran along the same formula in a way. You know, they get introduced as this goofy kind of hilarious comedic presence, and then they draw you in and they hook you with a great story. Now, the story in question here today would be Regular Show. That's the first one to me that I feel like I have to break down. Regular Show has had an impact on both my teenage years and now my young adult 20 to 25-ish range. Regular Show has taught me to slow down and truly just live in the moment especially when you're with friends. The show, if you're unfamiliar, focuses on Mordecai and Rigby. Mordecai and Rigby are park employees who quite literally do everything but their job. For instance, in some episodes, they're sending certain characters to the moon. In other episodes, they've got 5 baby ducks who manage to transform into a giant Mega Morphin Power Ranger kind of ordeal. Quite honestly, the possibilities were always endless. And when I tuned in, I knew that I was in for a good time. I think to this day, I have seen Regular Show roughly about 4 to 5 times. And that's all the way through, watched every episode from opening to credits. And it doesn't get old. Sure, there are some episodes that I kind of tune out on my third or fourth watch because they necessarily weren't my favorites, but do I still watch them? Yeah. J.G. Quintel did a great job. One of the best jobs I have ever seen on a television show. And it would be hard, in my opinion, to top that. And then we break into Adventure Time. Adventure Time by itself doesn't really make sense in the first couple of seasons. You don't really start seeing the story, honestly, until Finn gets his grass sword arm. And if you haven't seen it, then I apologize for the spoilers, but yes, he eventually gets a grass sword arm. That's not a huge spoiler, but if you know what it leads to, then eventually it becomes a spoiler. That show alone made me shed a tear. Kind of like the pirates in the SpongeBob SquarePants movie, where they all started crying when the last tear was shed. I started crying at the end of Adventure Time. I'm not going to put it out there, and I'm not going to ruin it in case you haven't seen the ending. But if you think that Adventure Time is just this silly, go-happy, lucky, funny show, I challenge you to finish it. I challenge you to make it all the way to the end without crying. Because I promise you'll cry at least once. Now, a show that a lot of people don't necessarily remember, but it is still one of my all-time favorites, would be Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends quite literally is exactly what it sounds like. Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends is where imaginary friends go when they get forgotten about. It's kind of like that movie If by Ryan Reynolds. I feel like he took a large inspiration from Foster's Home. But that show, to include its movie, to include its online game, captivated me for many, many years. It doesn't really have a premise from what I can remember. I don't know, I might do a rewatch to kind of see if the story picks up like regular show and Adventure Time. Considering it's a Cartoon Network original, I would say that yes, the story most likely does pick up. From what I can recall, though, they do have a movie somewhere out there in the nether sphere. But basically, it's about this kid Mac who isn't ready to give up his imaginary friend. Blue then moves into the imaginary home, and of course, Mac goes to visit him every day. They get into hijinks and shenanigans, and quite honestly, it's has been and always will be in my heart a good time. It even spawned one of the most iconic characters known as Cheese. And if you remember Cheese, he was addicted to chocolate milk. Much like myself, I personally think that Cheese could have been my imaginary friend. The way that my brain bounces around my head and I spit out random thoughts sporadically like someone yelling down a hallway but not quite sure what they're saying, but they sure are saying something. And his addiction to chocolate milk. The imaginary friend known as Cheese loved chocolate milk. Now, for the fourth show, it didn't necessarily start on Cartoon Network, but its main home became Cartoon Network after a little bit. Scooby-Doo. Scooby-Doo is one of my all-time favorite shows. The idea behind Scooby-Doo doesn't necessarily entertain me. You know, the idea of solving mysteries and kind of like the ID 24/7 investigation discovery, if you don't know ID, it kind of takes that adult theme and turns it into something childlike. It turns it into something that I can enjoy. It turns it into Scooby-Doo. Scooby-Doo, if you're not familiar, which I would be surprised if you weren't, follows the Mystery Machine Gang. Freddy, Daphne, and Velma, and then our lovable duo, Shaggy and Scooby-Doo. I was convinced for years that I could grow up to be exactly like Shaggy, hunting down monsters and catching ghosts. But unfortunately, I'm sitting in front of a camera making YouTube videos, so I can promise you it did not go like that. But nonetheless, when Scooby-Doo first premiered, it came out on Boomerang, and Boomerang then slowly transitioned into being Cartoon Network to where Scooby-Doo now lives today. Now, do I count shows like Velma as Scooby-Doo? Absolutely not. It's not Scooby-Doo. I don't care what you try to convince me of, it's not going to happen in my head. I personally like to watch the one that was on in the 90s. You can all hear and see the bats fly in on the iconic intro that is the old Scooby-Doo. The one that kind of looks fuzzy when it's animated, that one is truly what inspires my love for Scooby-Doo. Now, the next show on Cartoon Network that I so dearly loved was Ben 10. Ben 10 blew my mind when I first started watching it. I couldn't tell you why. I mean, it kind of sparked my fascination with aliens. Aliens have kind of always been something that I've been interested in, and I'm sure if you watch Joe Rogan like myself, you listen to the countless stories of how aliens could be, in fact, very much real. And it is odd to think of the existence of aliens, but at the same time, they very much could be true. Now, before I get sidetracked, which I pretty much already have, let me get back to Ben 10. Basically, what happens in Ben 10 is Ben goes on a camping trip with his uncle and his cousin, finds a watch. Now, to most viewers, what does he do with the watch? Well, it later reveals that the watch is an Omnitrix. The Omnitrix basically takes the DNA from any alien species, or any species in general, and gives the user, in this case Ben Tennyson, the ability to transform into said creature, species, alien, etc. And that was one of the coolest shows in my mind. I both watched that show and played the online game for Cartoon Network pretty much every day. And now to get even just a little bit more obscure, if you remember My Gym Partner's a Monkey, you're legendary. Not very many people remember that show, nor do they remember the online game associated, but My Gym Partner is a Monkey is one of the most classic Cartoon Network shows in existence. I could not tell you how good that show is. It is very much kind of the same audience that would watch a Fanboy and Chum Chum, but instead of being born in 2012 to 2015, you were born in my generation, 2000 to about 2003. Now, of course, other people could have watched it. I'm talking 1998, 99 to 2000, or maybe even some cool 04s and 05s may have watched it. But My Gym Partner, a Monkey, is hilarious. And if you haven't watched it, I highly give it probably a 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10, honestly. And those are just a couple of shows that I could think of off the top of my head that Cartoon Network put out there for us to watch. And I love them. I almost never watched Nickelodeon unless it was regarding to SpongeBob or, honestly, SpongeBob. And I never really watched Disney unless my sister had the TV on. Cartoon Network carried my childhood. And now I'm curious, which one carried yours? Nickelodeon, Disney, or Cartoon Network? Let me know in the comments below. As always, this has been The Kevin Show. Please like, subscribe, and get ready for the next episode. Adios. Have a wonderful week. See you later.